Hey, welcome back to the Experience Share. My name is Blake, and if you can't tell by this Frank Frazetta Death Dealer mat or the crown here on the table, I just won the most recent sorcery event streamed and held by the Eric's Curiosa team. So big shout out to Reaper Game Store here in Denton, Texas, Drew from On the Play, that's now part of the sorcery team, and everybody else involved to make this event happen. I wanted to go over my deck that I played to take first place and to go undefeated, the only 5-0 in the tournament, to get crowned this mat here. And so the avatar that everybody's starting off with is the Spell Slinger. And so just a quick breakdown for Spell Slinger. This is a more powerful avatar in sealed than I originally thought it was going to be. And it's nowhere near as good as Sorcerer, but it doesn't have to be. The format is slowed down enough to where you tap to draw a sight frequently, and there's not the pressure to continue to draw spell after spell, play a low mana curve, and just tap to be drawing cards. And so I really like the balance of the format that Spellslinger brings on. And you'll see in the finals match, because my opponent was not playing Spellslinger, I went ahead and was playing a more kind of aggressive path. But I wanted to show through the deck, pull out the cards that really stood out in the deck, and then walk through the mana base that I built to help support this deck. And we're going to start off with the water thresholds here. And the water cards, these are really ones that I had big bombs in, but I didn't have any lower curves to fill it out. And so we're going to start off, I had Shelly Coat, which is incredibly strong because this format is all about the 2/2 or the 2 power. And so because it has that takes 1 less damage, this is almost like a tufted turtle in certain circumstances. Shelly Coat comes down and is a really strong minion to play early because it can positively trade for you and put your opponent on the back end, on defense. Now, there's not a ton of removal in this format, which is why I was excited whenever I saw Lake Afak here, and it has lethal and submerge. Submerge didn't come into handy too much for me, but the lethal definitely does. There's not a ton of ways to remove big minions, and having the lethal, it's a great way to be able to go in and take down some of those larger minions, especially if you're able to get the lance on it. Then it's just a good clean 2-for-1. And speaking of 2-for-1, the MVP of the day was absolutely these snowballs. I don't know if Snowball is good enough to be able to see constructed play, but what Snowball does is it shoots a piercing projectile, and it'll hit minions that are stealth, it'll run through the realm, and then it does 1 damage to all units that are in the snowball at the end of the road. And so this also includes avatars. And so what you would see a lot is your opponent would have an avatar. This middle lane starts getting crowded. I throw 1 or 2 minions, they throw 1 or 2 minions, and then next thing you know, you're rolling a snowball, and it's taking all these and then hitting the avatar for 5 damage. And that can be devastating as a way to get a 2 or 3, sometimes even 4-for-1, while also dealing damage to your opponent. And to wrap up water, really it was the bombs is what was left. And the 2 bombs that I drafted were here we had the Minster Stoolworm, and at one first, beautiful art here. And what it has is submerge and waterbound, and then it has tap, choose a direction, and then the worm will shoot out lethal damage 1 at a time. And so what I would do is I would actually set it up right here on this middle square, and then it does lethal damage to everything here and all the way to the avatar. And then that just really locks down this board and is a really strong way to take over and get into the end game. And so this card was a huge bomb, came in clutch in so many different matches, especially in the finals match if you didn't see that one. And we have this massive 7/6 giant that is just incredibly strong. There's not a lot of hard removal in this deck, and so it takes a ton of resources to bring him down. That was it for the water. And if you look at some of these thresholds, everything is 2 thresholds, and then this one is 3. Shelly Coat's only 1. but that's a lot of threshold there. But these cards are so strong and so impactful that they had to be included. So then we go to the meat of the deck, and that's going to be Earth. And the cards that I underestimated the first time I played Sealed, it's this family cycle. These families are incredibly good, especially in Sealed when you're trying to play a 3-color deck. However, even then, it can be hard to get some of that thresholds you need for your knights. And so the villagers really strong at helping ensure that you have the thresholds that you needed. It didn't really matter in any of the games that I played, but what I would do is I would play him more conservative on my back end if I was missing threshold, and then more aggressive if I did not need the threshold. And I was able to use him as just kind of a regular 2/2. Then I was lucky enough to draft 2 of the leprechauns here that has Deathrite Draw a Sight. This probably looks pretty familiar to the Land Surveyor, except it has an extra power, and that extra power means quite a bit here. It's trading with a lot of things like the family cycle. A lot of the other minions in this format are 2 power. You give it a lance and it has first strike for 3, and that's a really powerful card with a good death rite effect. And also for constructed, if you're not playing Death Speaker and you're playing Land Surveyor, there's a chance that Leprechaun is better, because then if your opponent is playing a Death Speaker, they can't cast and get the benefit off of your own Land Surveyor. I'm gonna call Rescue out here. It has return a minion from your cemetery to your hand. I'm gonna talk more about that once we go over some of the other bombs in this in the Earth package here. Next was really just 3/3s, and so I had the pigs as well as the blue cap knockers, and what they are really in here for are just 3/3s. They have double Earth threshold, but they're on curve, on rate, and they trade in really well to these 2 power minions. Next, Brown Bear that helped pretty much bring me to victory on our game finals match. 4 power, really strong, and there's a neat synergy within the sites that I'll call out here, as well as I called out in the interview, that it just really synergizes well with Brown Bear and the Earth threshold required to cast it. And then we already mentioned one of the giants. We have the back half, which comes together, right, to make a pretty cool, it's this way, like a pretty cool art scene. And I realized that during while I was drafting it, but like this is how the I don't know if it was one painting that, or if it ended up being 2, but really cool to see these giants going after it. But the rescue was because there's not a ton of bombs in this format, and I really, I had the worm, I had these forerunners here, I had the rescue to be able to get them back. And so I played in my round 3 game, I cast a turn 5 worm, which I'll show you here in a second how, and my opponent was able to take a 2-for-1, but was able to kill it right away. But then I was able to rescue it back the following turn and then play it again. And get rid of a 7 power minion twice is really, really challenging in this sealed format. The last card I had was an elite, and it's Valor. Valor is a card that I am unsure of if I wouldn't draft this one very high. I don't think you're going to be upset having this in a draft or sealed pool, but it's not an elite that I'm just diving after. And it says, may be cast when an ally defends a site or another unit. The ally gains +4 this turn. So it requires you to have an untapped minion that they're trying to attack something else. Then you block, you cast Valor on your opponent's turn, so kind of that instant speed to be able to cast this. And I did get a really good play using a foot soldier, being able to cast Valor on the foot soldier, protecting one of my bears, killing a knight, and and being able to keep my foot soldier. So it did have value in the tournament, but it's less valuable because it's more situational than I maybe would have thought, because it needs to be another unit. It's not that you can cast Valor on the unit that's being attacked to give it +4. I feel like that would have made the card stronger, and I wonder if that was originally how it was designed. But if you think of Valor, it's kind of standing up for somebody in trouble. And what you might look at now is there's not a lot of removal. I have the Lake Affect, I have the two snowballs, but that's really it, which is why I ended up deciding to splash a third color. And that's not something I would like to do just because it is so important to get the right sites and thresholds out. But here comes that family cycle again to provide the threshold. And then you'll see these are all each just a singular threshold each. So let's cover them. And first, it's a couple of Joust. Joust is really strong because it says a target ally and an opponent can swap spots. And so what that could look like is you have a bear here, they have the knockers here, and then you can joust, and then you can come in, strike, killing the knockers, and then you can still go in and attack for 4. And that's what makes Joust so strong and so powerful there, was the ability to go in, use it as removal, but then also still be able to put on quite a bit of pressure. So that was Joust. The other one is Burning Hands. There's not a ton of ways, there's not a ton of finishers in this deck. And so Burning Hands gave me a way to be able to finish off an opponent on death's door. It has the ability where it can be cast by an allied mortal, which is unique, but it can also just be cast by your avatar. And it has that grid of wherever you are, it goes 2 damage and then 1 damage, and you can do that in 2 different directions. We talked about how this was the format of the 2-power minion. Burning Hands was really good at getting rid of a whole bunch of chump blockers, but it was also great because if you just take a step forward, even if you're on your back row, hey, look, and now they're on Burning Hands range. And it's super simple. So I would just take 1 turn typically to try to move up, so I can go ahead and get in that kind of nearby-ish range so I could cast Burning Hands. And then once you're here, you can kind of pivot whichever way your opponent goes to be able to finish them off. Now, the cards that we haven't talked yet about are the Night Cycles. And the Knights are a really, really strong cycle that probably go into this bomb category. And I opened some pretty good Knights. First, we had Sir Ironside, Sir Ironside, who has +3 power during your opponent's turn. And what makes this was such a good card defensively to play down, leave it untapped. Well, now it's a 4 mana, 7 power minion that your opponent's gonna have a really hard time dealing with. And so this was a great piece of defense. It is a unique card, so it was a really good pickup for us, and it happened to be in our double water threshold. And then we also had the Verdant Knight, which is 3 mana, 3 power, 2 defense, and it has Lance. So it came in with Lance, trades up really well. But there are a lot of things that are able to deal with this once the Lance is gone. It makes it kind of hard to profitably trade. But still, really strong multi-threshold card. And then in the Black Knight, this one was interesting just because I didn't have a ton of fire in the deck, so I didn't always have the fire threshold. But there were certain games, and I'll show some of the cards and sites that we used to be able to help get the fire threshold, but it was a really strong card to come in with 5 power, and it still had the 3 defense. Because of the 2 power format, you were able to play this out kind of on the sides and put a lot of pressure on. And this is kind of what solidified the deck here, was knowing I needed to add removal. And so I needed the Joust, I needed the Burning Hands, and then having just the sheer top end here of these waters that was supported by the Night package that we had. This was the way that I knew I had to go. And so let me move these. We'll grab the multi-threshold sites. We'll kind of set them aside here. And I want to go over the sites and how I built my mana base as I was going through it. And so you sorted these out by curve. And so we're going to do that again. And I use the curve part because it matters what thresholds I need and by what turn I need them by. And you'll see that we need a lot of water threshold. And that was the mana base was built in a way to help support us having a lot of threshold. I'm not really going to count. I'm going to count Valor as kind of a top end. It's typically a late game card more than anything else. But we're going to kind of put these. And then last but not least, our fire. So, okay. And sub that in. So for the sites, we'll talk about this one first, and that's annual fare. And this is good. It doesn't provide any threshold on its own, but it has pay one, and then you get to generate whatever threshold that you need. Because a lot of these are for the fire, I only need the one. It's basically counted as a fire site that I could also use to generate the extra blue, the extra water or earth sites that I might need in order to generate those thresholds as well. Next, I open up a forge here, which is the pay one to create a lance token. This deck doesn't utilize the lances all that well. I mean, anybody's happy to get a lance, but if you look at the curve here, we have plenty of twos. So we have twos, and we have a lot of threes, a lot of fours, and then fives. Like, there's not really a turn that we want to take off to cast Forge. And Forge, you kind of want to play it more up here on some of these more aggressive positions, so that way you can cast a minion to it, because really you want to Forge, create the lance, and then cast the minion on top to be able to pick up the lance right away, so your opponent doesn't come in, swoop down, and steal the lance from you. Next, we drew the Cursed Land, which was an interesting site to play, and you mainly used it late game because I didn't have a ton of fire, and I knew the fire spells, I'd be casting them late. I didn't mind putting this into my deck and knowing that I could place it, kind of over here on this side or over on this side, limiting my opponent's plays to where they can play sites without taking 2 damage. So it has, whenever another site is played nearby, its controller loses 2 life. Really strong effect. It did cost my opponents 2 life in one game, and I was able to pretty control and just play on the other side, so it didn't negatively impact me. Really strong card, and it's going to be definitely seek some constructed play. I did not draft a ton of earth sites, and so we do have just 2 of the regular valleys from the draft kits that says you can include any number of valleys in your deck, and then we did get a common village, which is very similar to the beta lands, and you can go ahead and use that to create a foot soldier token by paying 1. And next we had the Bear Patch, which says whenever an enemy unit enters or leaves this site, it takes 1 damage. This matters with Lance in certain circumstances. It mattered in game 1, I believe. I talked about that in the interview, some of how by him taking the damage right away and then the Lance, I would have finished him off with would have been the Verdiant Knight. So a decent card. I don't think it's going to be able to see too much constructed play, but these basic sites for water are incredibly strong. But before we get into those, we got the good old Troll Bridge, which reminds me a lot of Free City, and it has the first time an enemy unit enters here, each turn, strike it unless they discard a card. And that's one thing. If they're the bridge or the Troll Bridge, really good. It made my opponent discard a card early on for them to be able to get in some damage, and it just slows down the game. And so what I would try to do is put this Troll Bridge right up here and make it really challenging for my opponent to come in, because then I can go, place one site here, and then I can place them both here. And then it's like, if you want to come in, you can, but you're going to have to discard a card. You can see that we have a big top-end deck here, and so we're trying to get to the late game, and this is one of the ways. MVP of the day for sure. Troll Bridge, really strong. We have the split of 2 ponds, 2 bogs, and I think I actually ended up drafting unboxing from the packs 3 of each of these. And so it was interesting trying to figure out the right balance of which ones to play. Pond has Genesis this turn. The next beast you cast costs 1 less, and you get to ignore its threshold. And then Bog has Genesis until your next turn. Units are immobile while atop a nearby site. These 2 sites hurt so strong. There were several times that they came in clutch to help me win a match. Pond, you'll see in the finals, I'm able to get out of turn 3 Brown Bear, and that was just too much for my opponent to be able to deal with. You'll also see in that match, I was able to bog down one of his knights, then cast the worm, making it where he couldn't move his knight, and then tap it to deal lethal damage by stopping them. Bog was also good because it slows down your opponent to make them not be able to take some of those aggressive plays. And so I'd be able to bog and then set up more of a defensive position, knowing that I want to get to the late game because my top end is so strong. One thing that stood out to me was because I had the worm, I wanted 3 water sites right here as often as I could. And so what that typically meant was I was trying to avoid playing any sort of water here because I knew how important it was to be on those 3 in case I got the worm. Because worm sitting on these squares here, it can just lock down a game. But these, there's really not a card I would say that underperformed or that I wouldn't want to put in the deck again. I kind of share that Valor is one that I'm not going to high pick in draft. I think it's better. I would have rather that been another Brown Bear. I would have rather that been another Lake. There's plenty of other cards that would have been better than Valor, but I did get a nice blowout turn because of it. The Knights are incredibly strong. If you're able to pick up some of the Knights early in a draft, I would. The families are really strong at helping be able to turn on your threshold to be able to play these. But what I'll say is if you've never played draft, you've never played sealed, this was a ton of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed this format. Every game that I played was competitive. They were close. We had a good time. We enjoyed it. The cards interact really well. It's well balanced. There's not a ton of cards I'm like, oh, I wouldn't play this at all. I can't believe I opened this. Like everything feels playable. Everything feels fun. So if this is your first time drafting, I encourage you to draft this. I'm going to put out a video here very soon going through all of the ordinaries and exceptionals, including the sites, to help prepare you for your upcoming drafts. And so I'll ask you to stay tuned for that. But until then, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I'm also going to link a Discord channel to this video here and put it into the description. They talked about releasing draft format into Tabletop Simulator in the near future. I think it would be a ton of fun to have a channel where we can get together, we can draft, and help just continue to grow the community, talk about different decks that are doing well. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.